I never thought I'd dread Sunday dinners, but ever since my mom started dating Richard, that tradition turned into torture. He wasn't just arrogant, he had this talent for making people feel small. And somehow, my mom adored him for it. That night, I walked into her house wearing a simple black shirt and jeans. Richard's eyes swept over me the moment I stepped inside. His smirk said everything before he even opened his mouth. "Well, someone didn't get the dress code memo," he chuckled, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. My mom laughed awkwardly and swatted his arm, but she didn't defend me. She never did. I took my seat quietly, letting him have his moment. After all, I had learned long ago that silence was the best shield. At least until the right time came to speak. The appetizers were served, and Richard leaned back in his chair like he owned the place. "So," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "what is it you do these days? Still working those little side gigs?" His tone carried the same weight as if he were asking if I still played with toys. The room went silent, forks hovering midair. He was enjoying every second of it. I forced a polite smile. "Something like that," I said calmly. My mom avoided my eyes, pretending to fuss with her napkin. Richard grinned triumphantly, like he had just won some invisible contest. But what he didn't know, what no one at that table knew, was that those little side gigs had turned into something far bigger than he could ever imagine. And dinner was only just beginning. The main course hadn't even arrived, and Richard was already on his third glass of wine. His confidence seemed to swell with every sip. "So tell me," he continued, pointing his fork at me as if I were some curious exhibit, "when are you going to get serious about life? I mean, it's nice to chase dreams, but at some point, you've got to face reality." My cousin Emily shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My uncle cleared his throat. No one dared to speak up. This was Richard's show, and my mother, for reasons I still couldn't comprehend, loved being his audience. I kept my voice steady. "I actually enjoy what I do." Richard burst out laughing. "Enjoyment doesn't pay the bills, kiddo. You know, when I was your age, I was already making six figures. Bought my first house at 25. That's what being a real man looks like." He leaned back, clearly pleased with himself. My mom's cheeks flushed, half with pride for him, half with embarrassment for me. She finally looked at me and whispered, "Maybe Richard just wants the best for you." That stung more than his words. My own mother thought his mockery was guidance. I clenched my jaw and glanced around the table. Everyone avoided my eyes. They'd written me off long ago, assuming I was just drifting through life. And honestly, I had let them believe it. But Richard was different. He wasn't just dismissing me. He was humiliating me, chipping away at my dignity with every smug remark. What he didn't realize was that I could end this entire charade with a single sentence. But I wasn't ready yet. No, if I was going to reveal the truth, I wanted it to cut deep. And dinner was the perfect stage. The waiter brought out the roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and steamed vegetables, placing everything neatly in the center of the table. Richard immediately reached for the best cut, making sure his plate looked like a king's feast before passing anything along. "See, that's the problem with your generation," he said while chewing, his voice muffled but still grating. "You think life's about passion projects and freedom. No discipline, no real responsibility. That's why so many of you end up, well," he waved his fork in my direction, "still sitting at your mother's table like this." I felt heat rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "And what about you?" I asked lightly. "What are you doing these days?" His chest puffed out. "Consulting," he said proudly, as if it were a royal title. "I make businesses profitable again. It's all about connections, kid. Something you clearly don't have." The table chuckled nervously, half at his joke, half to avoid tension. My mother gave me a pleading look, silently begging me not to start a fight. Connections. The word rattled around in my head. If only he knew the phone calls I had taken that morning. If only he knew the contracts sitting on my desk, waiting for my signature. I cut a small piece of chicken, chewed slowly, and let the silence hang. Richard hated silence. It made him restless. And right on cue, he filled it again. "Don't take it personally," he added with mock sincerity. "Not everyone's cut out for success. Some of us are leaders, and some just watch." My grip tightened around the fork. He wanted me to snap, to prove him right. But instead, I smiled faintly. "Funny thing about leaders," I said softly. Sometimes they don't even recognize the ones sitting right in front of them. Richard raised an eyebrow, clearly not catching my meaning. But he would. Oh, he would. Richard leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his glass like he was some movie villain giving a lecture. You know, I've been thinking, he said loudly, your mom and I should host more of these dinners. Good for family bonding. Maybe next time, we'll even do it at a nicer place than this little dining room. I almost choked on my water. Her dining room? The house we were sitting in wasn't his. It wasn't even my mom's. She'd moved in with him after selling her old place, and yet here he was acting like he owned everything in sight. My aunt cleared her throat. It's a beautiful home already. Richard smirked. Sure, but imagine what I could do with it. Some modern touches, a bigger patio, maybe a pool. Places like this are just waiting for the right kind of man to make them shine. He shot me a sideways glance, like I was the wrong kind of man by default. My mother laughed softly, as though trying to keep the peace. I let him keep talking, every arrogant word digging him deeper. He thought he was untouchable, the smartest man at the table. And maybe to everyone else he was, but to me, he was an open book, loud, predictable, desperate to impress. I dabbed my mouth with a napkin and finally spoke. Funny, I actually helped redesign a house not too long ago. Went for a modern concept too. Pool, indoor gym, the works. Richard chuckled dismissively. Oh, sure you did. What, you were painting walls? As a handyman. The table laughed with him, though awkwardly. My chest tightened, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. Not quite. I just approved the final draft. The architects were the ones worried about the details. The laughter faded. Richard blinked, confused. My mom gave me a sharp look, as if warning me not to say more. But the truth was already bubbling up. And once it slipped out, there'd be no putting it back. Richard narrowed his eyes at me, clearly unsure whether I was bluffing. Approve the final draft, he repeated with a mocking grin. Listen, kid, I've been around. I can smell BS a mile away. You don't strike me as the type who's signing off on blueprints. I shrugged casually. Believe what you want. That answer seemed to irritate him more than if I defended myself. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eager to press. All right then, enlighten me. What exactly do you do? Because so far, all I've heard are vague little stories. No real job, no real title. Just smoke. The table went quiet again. My mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hand brushing against his arm, as if begging him to stop. But Richard thrived on being the center of attention, and he wasn't letting go. I set my fork down, took a sip of water, and smiled faintly. I run a company. Richard burst out laughing, so hard he nearly spilled his wine. A company? Oh, that's rich. What is it, some Etsy shop? Selling trinkets online. His laughter echoed around the room, and I saw my cousin Emily wince. My aunt and uncle looked down at their plates. My mom stared at me, her eyes wide with panic, silently begging me not to escalate. I tilted my head slightly, never breaking eye contact with Richard. No, not Etsy. Real estate. That shut him up for half a second. Then he smirked again. Real estate, huh? You mean like renting out an apartment or two? Airbnb hustling? Please. I deal with million-dollar portfolios every week. Don't embarrass yourself. My pulse was steady now. Calm. Controlled. Because I knew something he didn't. The very company he bragged about consulting for last month, the one he claimed he had saved from collapse, was one of mine. And he had no clue. I leaned back in my chair, letting his smug words hang in the air. Richard grinned like he'd just scored a victory, sipping his wine with that irritating slurp. My mom finally spoke, her voice nervous. Sweetheart, maybe we don't need to get into work talk tonight. But Richard cut her off with a laugh. No, let him talk. I want to hear about this real estate empire of his. This should be good. I studied him for a moment, then said calmly, Do you remember Whitmore Holdings? The color drained slightly from his face, but he recovered quickly with another laugh. Of course I do. Big company, been struggling for years. I helped turn them around. Why? I nodded slowly. Interesting, because I'm the majority shareholder. Silence. The kind that presses down on a room, heavy and unshakable. Forks stopped clinking. Breathing seemed louder. My mom blinked at me like she didn't understand the words. Richard's smirk faltered. You're joking. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With a few swipes, I opened a press release from 6 months ago. Whitmore Holdings welcomes new majority shareholder and CEO. My name sat bold in the headline. I slid the phone across the table toward him. I don't joke about business. He stared at the screen, his hand frozen on his glass. My aunt covered her mouth. Emily let out a tiny gasp. My mom just sat there, stunned, her hand gripping her napkin, so tightly it looked like it might tear. Richard finally forced a chuckle, but it sounded thin. Well, that's impressive. I suppose you left that part out before. I tilted my head. You didn't ask. You assumed. The words landed like a stone in the quiet room. And for the first time all night, Richard didn't have a clever comeback. Richard cleared his throat and set his glass down, trying to recover his composure. His usual smirk had melted into something tighter, more forced. Well, he said, voice wobbling just slightly, titles don't mean much. Anyone can buy their way into a company. The real question is, can you run it? I smiled faintly. Apparently well enough for the board to vote me in as CEO. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. My mom's eyes darted between us, her face pale. She looked almost embarrassed. Not at me, but at him. Richard leaned forward, desperate to regain control. Okay, so maybe you've got some money. But money doesn't buy respect. It doesn't buy experience. I've been in the game for decades. And yet, I said softly, you sat at this table tonight and bragged about helping Whitmore Holdings without realizing the person who hired you was me. The words sank in slowly, like poison. His face flushed deep red, his jaw tightening. My aunt looked away to hide a smile. Emily stared at me with wide, almost admiring eyes. I leaned back casually, cutting another piece of chicken, as if the conversation meant nothing. So, thank you for your consultation, Richard. Though, if I remember correctly, your contract was terminated early. That hit him. Hard. He shifted in his chair, his confidence crumbling in front of everyone. For once, he didn't have a comeback. My mom finally broke the silence, her voice trembling. You never told me any of this. I looked at her, my tone gentle but firm. You never asked. The silence after my words stretched long, heavy with everything unsaid. My mom's eyes glistened, as if she was only now realizing how little she truly knew about me. Richard, meanwhile, was unraveling. He dabbed his forehead with his napkin, though the room wasn't warm. His arrogance had shrunk into something smaller, almost pitiful, but he wasn't ready to surrender. Well, he muttered, forcing a laugh, I suppose even a broken clock is right twice a day. Maybe you just got lucky. I set down my fork carefully, making sure my movements were calm, deliberate. Luck didn't get me through 14-hour workdays. It didn't sign multimillion-dollar contracts. And it certainly didn't put me in the position to employ people like you. The last words hit the table like a hammer. Emily let out a sharp breath, my uncle coughed awkwardly, and my aunt gave me a subtle nod of approval. Richard swallowed hard. For the first time, his eyes dropped. He couldn't meet mine. And in that moment, I felt something shift. All those years of being dismissed, underestimated, even by my own mother, had built to this dinner. And finally, I wasn't the one shrinking under someone else's voice. I looked at my mom gently, but with a firmness she couldn't ignore. Respect is a two-way street. I don't mind being questioned, but I won't be mocked. Not by him. Not by anyone. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to defend Richard, but the words never came. Instead, she just lowered her gaze, her silence louder than anything she could have said. Dinner went on, but it wasn't the same. The power in the room had shifted, and Richard knew it. He tried to eat, but his hands shook as he held his fork. For the first time all evening, he wasn't the one in control. Richard barely touched his plate after that. His appetite seemed to have vanished with his confidence. Every so often he'd glance at me, then quickly look away, like a man staring at the sun too long. Emily finally broke the tension. I think it's amazing, she said softly, her eyes on me. You built all of that on your own. I nodded. Every bit of it. And I don't say it to brag. I say it because people like Richard want you to believe you're less than what you are. They thrive on that. But the truth is, anyone can rise above if they're willing to outwork everyone else. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. My words weren't just about him anymore, they were about the way my whole family had always looked at me. My aunt raised her glass. To hard work, then. The others followed, though my mom hesitated. She clinked her glass against mine weakly, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite read. Pride. Guilt, maybe both. Richard cleared his throat, trying one last time to claw back his authority. Well, money isn't everything. At the end of the day, family matters most. I met his gaze evenly. Then maybe you should start acting like family instead of competition. That shut him down for good. He leaned back, lips pressed tight, his face pale. The rest of the meal went by in near silence, broken only by the clinking of cutlery. For once, Richard wasn't dominating the conversation. He wasn't mocking me. He wasn't mocking anyone. And I could see in his eyes. He knew the image he had carefully built in front of my mom and the rest of the family had cracked, and there was no way to piece it back together. When dessert finally arrived, cheesecake and coffee, Richard didn't touch his plate. He sat stiffly, his wine glass empty, his usual smug grin nowhere to be found. My mom kept stealing glances at him, then at me, torn between the man she thought she knew and the child she thought she understood. After a long silence, she finally whispered, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I took a slow breath. Because every time I tried, you looked at me the way he did tonight. Like I was small. Like I was chasing something silly. So I stopped talking. I just worked. And now, well, here we are. Her face softened, her hand trembling slightly as she set down her fork. For once, she had no defense for him. Richard tried one last time, his voice quieter, almost desperate. "I didn't mean to disrespect you. I just thought." I cut him off gently, but firmly. "You thought wrong. And if you want a future with my mother, you'll need to learn one thing. Never mistake humility for weakness." The words lingered in the room, echoing louder than any argument could. Richard lowered his gaze. He had no comeback left. No bravado. Nothing. As we stood to leave, Emily gave me a quick, proud smile. My aunt squeezed my shoulder. My mom lingered by the doorway, looking at me as though she was seeing me for the very first time. I walked out into the cool night air, the weight of years of silence finally lifting off my chest. Richard had tried to humiliate me, but in the end, he had only unmasked himself. And now, he would never forget who I really was.